Moving on to the next segment in this episode, we're going to be talking about the best tight ends in the league. And I know KT mentioned his all-time top three tight ends this last in this last segment, but now we're going to be talking about the best tight ends in the league right now and what they have done over the last few years. KT, we'll start off at number one. And go through 16, and if we have time, we'll go through 32. But we'll start off at number one, and we'll each rank where we have certain tight ends. But who is your number one tight end in the league?
From this past season, I feel like I'm going to get a lot of hate from this, but I'm going based off production and upside. I'm going to take the hot take and say Brock Bowers.
Whoa. Okay, so we're starting off really high here with Brock Bowers. Very understandable. This is a guy who broke pretty much every rookie tight end record in his first year. A guy who lived up to all the hype and more coming out of college, exceeded expectations. And I think, yeah, I mean, I 100% get the anticipation of what he can do in the near future. He is a generational tight end prospect. Personally, however, I'm going to go with the guy who I'm a fan of. I have a poster of this man in my bedroom, none other than George Kittle. Maybe call me a little bit biased here, but I mean, we're talking about a guy who has done exactly what he has done over the last 6, 7 years. If not for a guy named Travis Kelce, I think he would be looked at even better than he already is. But yes, he has been one of the most stable parts of the San Francisco 49ers in what has otherwise been a very disappointing year for us. But that's going to be my number one tight end. For who is your number two?
Travis Kelce. He's still the gold standard for all tight ends across the league, and every tight end in the league should aspire to be somewhat like him.
Travis Kelce. I know you talked about how much you like him as a route runner. For number two, I'm going to go with Trey McBride. I think a guy who every time I watch him on film, he impresses me even more. A guy who he is just a phenomenal route runner. I think his footwork is very underrated as far as how he can kind of just get to a spot, dig his foot in, and just create separation right off the bat. He's got incredible frame to be able to use against smaller defensive backs and is a very, very underrated blocker, even for how good people praise him for his blocker. I don't think he gets enough praise already. I think he is even better than most people say he is. For me, he's my number two tight end in the league.
Okay.
At number three,
George Kittle, your guy. He's physical, doesn't lack a thing when it comes to run game, run blocking. He's really a really good upside for the 49ers, especially for Brock Bowers. Not Brock Bowers, Brock Purdy.
at number
and,
three, I'm gonna go ahead.
and he's a really good receiver threat also. But other than that, I want to hear your three.
At number three, I'm going to go with Travis Kelce. Like you said, he's the gold standard of the tight end position. At his worst, I mean, I'm going to take an Aaron Rodgers quote here, as we found out earlier this year or earlier this day, that Aaron Rodgers is signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Very strange move, but whatever.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, in the same way for that Aaron Rodgers said, a career down year for Travis Kelce is a career year for most tight ends. And that is exactly what happened. Travis Kelce is slowly on the downside, but he is still easily one of the best tight ends in all of football. We're talking about a guy who, for the last 6, 7 years, if we're going to go off of PFF and analytics, he never had less than an 85 PFF grade until this past year. Just ridiculous numbers. And a guy who has great chemistry with his quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. They seem to just think differently from any other quarterback tight end duo in the league, how they can just kind of run their own routes and just be on the same page always. There's not a single tight end in the league who can do the things that Travis Kelce does in that same way. Who is your number four though?
Trey McBride,
Trey
emerging
McBride.
pass catcher with spectacular hands, in my opinion.
At number four for me, I'm gonna go with your guy, Brock Bowers, number one. Um, I think this is the only reason I don't have him higher simply because of the fact that he is a rookie. And at the end of the day, I don't like hyping up rookies more than they should be. I don't feel like, unless you're talking about a guy like, like what Gale Sayers had in the 60s, where he was, that good as a rookie, or Devin Hester. We're talking more recently. Some guys that you just cannot compare. Usually, I'm not going to rank a rookie at any position number one, no matter how good they are. But yes, I mean Brock Bowers. If we're talking about just what he can be next year, I very much expect him to be one of the top two, if not number one tight end in the entire league.
Okay. And then for my five, go Birds. Not playing. I have Mark Andrews.
Mark Andrews, tight end who a few years ago I would argue was as good as any tight end in the league. Um, Outperformed Travis Kelce and George Kittle to become a first team All Pro selection in 2021. But more recently, he was the laughing stock of one of the lesser memorable days of this past season for the Baltimore Ravens, that being when they lost against the Buffalo Bills. Um,
Mm.
for me, however, I'm going to go with a guy who I think is super, super underrated, consistently as good as he needs to be for his team. Not the number one option per se on his team because they have the best receiver in the league, in my opinion, but he has been a stable part of every organization that he has been with in the NFC North. That is going to be TJ Hawkinson, a guy who is, I would argue, as on the Mount Rushmore of best blocking tight ends in the entire NFL, and a guy who consistently gets close to 60, 70 receptions a game and has great yards per reception at that level. Does exactly what his team needs to and is great on all levels. Maybe not the best at any certain thing, but decent enough separation, great hands, exactly what every team needs, and a guy who's constantly an 80 plus PFF grade on. If we're looking at advanced analytics, always shows up in the top 10 of every metric.
Oh yeah. That's why I have him at my six. Like you said, reliable, good in routes. He's just all around solid, great T.
For my number six, I'm gonna go with another guy from the NFC North. The NFC North has some great tight ends, let's be honest there.
I can agree.
Um, but for me, I'm gonna go at number six with Sam Laporta of the Detroit Lions. I would have him a little bit higher. I think what he's done, especially what he did as a rookie, very much make the argument that he is a top five tight end. The reason why I don't is because I want to see what he ends up doing this year without Ben Johnson as offensive coordinator. Ben Johnson was just one of those offense coordinators that makes every guy on that offense that much better. But yeah, I mean, Sam Laporta, we're talking about the numbers, had 900 yards as a rookie. And then as a sophomore, he had uh, what was it? Remind me. He had 726 yards, playing 16 of 17 games. Very much consistent as far as what he can do in the receiving game. Even better blocker in my eyes. I value blocking a lot with the tight ends, especially because of what you said about how blocking is kind of disappearing a little bit more in the game given the new types of systems. For that reason, Sam Laporta is my number six tight end.
And for my number seven, I do have Sam Porter.
Damn.
Great,
So go
great
ahead.
side route running. He's another TJ Hawkinson in the making in my eyes. I just need to see a little bit more from him, being that he is a rookie. I know
Right.
I put rookie at my one, but the only reason is because he's doing monumental things in just his first year and compared to Sam Laporta.
Right. Definitely. I would say for my number seven, um, this one's a little bit more tricky. Um, I'm gonna go with another guy who I think is super, super underrated. I'm gonna go with Pat Fryermuth. A guy who, much like TJ Hawkinson, fantastic blocker. I wouldn't go as far as saying he's a top five blocker of the tight ends in the league, but a guy who is constantly, as far as the advanced analytics, always showing up as a top 10 tight end. I think a very underrated part of the Steelers game. When you talk about a team that is as good as they are in the run game, constantly creating for his opposing offenses, and a guy who doesn't get enough credit for what he does as far as yards per reception and what he is in the red zone. A guy who this past year had a 62.8 success rate as a tight end, and a guy who has 10 yards per reception. So we're talking about a guy who is consistently looked at when needed as a safety blanket by whatever quarterback that the Steelers are throwing out there. Just someone who I think that gets underlooked for his value on a very good run blocking Steelers team.
And for my eight, I want to say this is the best tight end in the NFC South, and I may get a bit of hate for it, but Kyle Pitts.
Kyle Pitts,
Tremendous upside, but my only problem with him is that he's inconsistent. I feel that
definitely.
with the new quarterback change and the Falcons making Michael Penix their solidified starter for the upcoming season, and he is mostly their number one, if not number two, being that there's Drake London. He is a very big target and a target that they're going to go to a lot in this upcoming season.
Absolutely. I will argue from a fantasy football standpoint, Kyle Pitts is extremely frustrating. Don't ever draft him as a fantasy football. You cannot rely on him. Every time you think that he's going to be, you know, that good in fantasy football, oh my God, he frustrates the hell out of you. In real life, he frustrates the hell out of you even more because you think that some scheme that is going to be put out there is going to help him. But then again, when you have Arthur Smith, you're more likely to use Jonnu Smith than you are to use Kyle Pitts for whatever reason.
Mhm.
It is what it is. But at number eight, I'm going to go with the guy that you ranked at number five. I'm going to go with Mark Andrews here. I still think he's one of the best tight ends. I think that he had obviously a very slow start to the this past season, and the drops are a big issue. But a guy like you said, fantastic blocker, fantastic route runner, and just an overall very much a do-it-all tight end. Does exactly what need be in the Ravens system.
And for my nine, a sleeper, in my opinion, David Njoku.
I'm
Big,
glad you mentioned that name.
he's a really good big play threat, athletic. But the only thing that I can say has been holding him back from his full potential is his injuries. If he's to stay healthy, I feel that he's in the top three conversation, especially among the guys who are in the league currently.
I don't know if I'd go as far as say he'd be a top three tight end, but yes, for that same reason, I have David Njoku at nine. I think a guy who's one of the best red zone tight ends in the league. And as you mentioned, if it's not for injuries, he would be looked at a lot better than he is. I'd also say he's underlooked just because he plays for the Cleveland Browns. There's a reason why our podcast is called The Winning Browns, because the Browns lose that much and because their players get slept on. Because of that. And David Njoku is one of those types of players. A guy who, whenever he has a big game, he is the threat on the Cleveland Browns team. But yes, David Njoku, for that reason, is also my number nine tight end.
And for my 10, I have Dalton Schultz because he's a reliable target, consistent, very, very consistent in the pass game, more likely than the block game, but he is still a solid blocker.
At number 10, I'm going to go with another tight end from the NFC North. I just seem to love the tight ends from the NFC North, but I'm going to go with Cole Kmet, a guy who I'm excited to see what he does now that he has Ben Johnson as his quarterback, as his offensive coordinator, excuse me. And a guy who I thought had a breakout last 2 years, especially a guy who surprisingly did not make the Pro Bowl, had 719 yards in 2023 and is consistently having about 11 yards per reception, as well as a 60 to 70% success rate, top with guys like George Kittle and the aforementioned Pat Fryermuth, and a fantastic blocker. So yes, for me, 6'6", 260, and uses his body very well. I'm going to go with Cole Kmet as my number 10.
At my 11, let me make sure my list is right. Yeah, at my 11, I have Irv Smith Jr. from the Bengals.
Ooh,
Very athletic, very high upside, and a very, very good blocker. I know they didn't have the season that they projected with the quarterback that had the most passing yards, passing touchdowns, triple crown receiver, and a very solid wide receiver too in T. Higgins. But in their offense, he plays his part very well, and I feel like this upcoming season he's going to play it better than he has last season.
I did not expect Irv Smith to be this high. I'll tell you that. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say what you said. I wouldn't put him this high, but
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, he is definitely one of the best route runners as far as separation goes. He's definitely up there, and I can very well see an argument for him from that standpoint. For me, however, at number 11, I'm gonna go with another Dalton. That you didn't mention earlier. For me, a guy who, for the same reasons you put Irv Smith this high, I'm gonna put him this high. I'm gonna go with one of my favorite players from college football when he played in college football, and that is going to be Dalton Kincaid.
Mhm.
Pretty much for the same reasons. Um, you know, fantastic route runner, great at separation, very speedy tight end. And I don't think he gets talked enough about when you talk about the fact that that Buffalo Bills team doesn't have, a highlight receiver. So Dalton Kincaid provides them with that type of option.
Agreed. For my 12, I have a guy that you mentioned higher in your ranking, Pat Freiermuth. Steelers, reliable, very tough, and a steady receiving option for their offense.
At number 12 we are, right?
Yeah.
Yes. At number 12, I'm gonna go with the guy you mentioned earlier, and that is gonna be Texans tight end Dalton Schultz. Like you said, a guy who's constantly very much focused as far as what he can do in the receiving game. And a guy who is still a very decent blocker, and I'm excited to see what he does with the new Texans offensive coordinator.
For my 13, I have another surpriser. I'm going to go with Evan Ingram from the Jaguars. He's a versatile and athletic threat on offense, offers more of a unique mismatch skill when it comes to when it comes to the pass game because he is more of a blocker than a passer. If I was to compare his game to another current NFL tight end, I can compare it to Kyle Pitts, but I feel that Kyle Pitts has more upside than Evan Ingram.
I'm also going to go with 13 with Evan Ingram for the exact same reasons you mentioned. I would put him a little higher if we're just talking about him as a receiver. I think he's helped Trevor Lawrence continue to develop into a better quarterback. Maybe not a quarterback worth 55 million, but certainly a quarterback that is in the top half of the league. But yes, he has very much a lot of problems as a blocker, and for that reason, he is at number 13 rather than in the top 10.
Mm. For my 14, a player that in my eyes is going to have a breakout season because of their receiver draft choices and their quarterback upside, Tucker Kraft, the Packers.
It looks like you and I are on thinking with the same exact mind here because I have Tucker Kraft also at uh, number 14 for those exact same reasons. Tucker Kraft is a guy who had 700 receiving yards this past year, a 400-yard jump, and I think that he is anticipated for an even bigger jump this next year, like you said.
Oh yeah,
And finally, we are going to go with our 15th tight end. Who do you have at number 15?
Jonnu Smith.
Oh no, you did not. The memes are gonna go crazy after this.
Uh, I mean, I give my flowers when they're due. He's in my eyes, he is a tight end and the tight end for the Dolphins. Versatile, athletic, and is used in a lot of multiple roles.
I'm gonna go with the guy that Arthur Smith is gonna hate me now that you mentioned Jonnu Smith, but I'm gonna go with the guy you mentioned earlier for this reason, Kyle Pitts. I
Mm.
think that, like you said, he has a lot of potential as far as what he can do with Atlanta's new offensive coordinator. Great route runner, not necessarily the greatest blocker, but reminds me that way a lot of what Vernon Davis did when he was with Jim Harbaugh. So I'm excited to see what he ends up doing this next year with the speed and the overall talent that he has. But yeah, that is the rest. That is our list, our top 15, and I'll put them in the comments section. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. But yeah, that about wraps it up today with our interview with, again, Christian, aka KT Turner. KT, thank you so much for dropping by. We'll make sure to try to get you on the podcast down the line. Um, but thank you so much for watching today. Please remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
Peace.